So you want to be a Solana developer? That's great, you've come to the right spot. In this 7-day series, I'm gonna walk you through the fundamentals of things you just really need to understand in order to be able to write programs for Solana. This is for people who do have experience in software development, but not necessarily developing on Solana. You might come from Solidity, you might come from web development, you might come from anywhere really. However, this is not a introduction to programming kind of a series. I do expect that you have some background in that. And who knows, maybe you can get through this with some vibe coding. That's fine with me. Also, you don't need to do this series in 7 days. You can go through it in one single day. I'm not your mom. I'm not telling you what to do. But my intention is that you do it in 7 days. I will also give you homework. And if you do it faster, chances are that you skip that. And if you go slower than the 7 days, then chances are that you're not really following up on it. So my recommendation is that you do it for the next 7 days. Starting today, day 1, where we get ourselves an overview of what Solana really is and set up some tools how we can work with it. So let's get started with Solana Development in 2026. Yes, I did make a similar series before, but things get out of date so quickly in this space that I decided we need a new series, and here it is. Yes. Let's go and jump right in. So Solana, what is this? Solana is a public blockchain. And what is that? Well, we're talking about distributed ledger technologies here. But what is a ledger? You can think of a ledger as something like a collection of some data. For instance, who owns how much money, something like this, where Andy has $2 and Anatoly has 10K or whatever. Just that it's not analog, but it's digital. It's a digital technology. Plus, it's not on one server, but it's distributed amongst many machines. And in Solana, those are the validators. Each of those validators knows how much funds is in which wallet. And the funds we're talking about here are Sol. Sol being the native coin of Solana. That's the symbol for it. Currently, there is 619 million Sol in existence. But it's not like we need to worry about that as devs. However, we do need to worry about Sol as devs. Since it's being the native currency, that's how you pay for stuff on Solana. So okay, Solana is a DLT, a distributed ledger technology. More specifically, it is a blockchain. So the technical implementation of how it persists changes to the ledger is through blocks that are built on top of each other. So whenever something changes, a new block is built on top of the old ones and it has the information of what has changed. And then another block is built on top of that. And that's how the blockchain updates the ledger. Solana has already built 376 million blocks because the chain focuses on high throughput and low latency. We're building blocks every 400 milliseconds and we can fit quite a few updates into one of those blocks. I have already mentioned that Solana is a public blockchain, which means that anybody can read from it. For instance, if you're interested how much Sol solandy.sol has, this is their wallet and this is their wallet's balance. Anybody can look at that. That's public information. So for you as a developer, that's already one thing to keep in mind, that whatever you store on the blockchain is public information. And also, it can't be deleted anymore. Even if you revert the change, it's still always being incremental. So for instance, if I would spend all of my money, you could still see that at one point in the past, I had that money. So that's relevant for privacy reasons. And certain things you should just not put on the blockchain unencrypted. Okay, so it's public, anybody can read, anybody can write. But in order to write something to the blockchain, you need to go through consensus. So obviously I can't just say, hey, I have 1,000 Sol now, because I would need to convince all of those validators that that's actually the case. Because those validators, they are the ones building the blocks. Yeah, here we can see who's building the blocks. So if I want something to change, then I need to tell the validators, hey, can you change that? And because the validators are usually busy with producing blocks and participating in consensus, there are the RPC nodes that we as developers really talk to. And those RPC nodes are basically validators, except they don't participate in consensus, but they let applications or developers like us talk to them, and then they forward the information to the validators. That's what the RPC nodes are for. They have a simple API. We just talk to them with HTTP requests, and we will see that in more detail in future videos. For now, what I want you to understand is that it's the validators who decide what changes are being persisted to the blockchain, and they have a consensus algorithm that contains stuff like nobody can just come up with Sol. It needs to come from somewhere else. And obviously there are more rules. But yeah, the validators are essentially what make up Solana. And since it is a public blockchain, anybody can run a validator. However, there are economics to this that I don't want to get into, because we as developers, we don't really need to bother about that much. It's good to have an understanding that, okay, the validators is really what makes up Solana, but we really just need to talk to the RPCs, and we can treat that as a black box. We could treat it as one single server that has the ledger, but really it's several machines. Currently, how many do we have? 800? Okay. Currently about 800 validators. The numbers differ a bit, but roughly 800 validators currently. Has been more. And we could go into staking and all that stuff, but really for us devs, it's not that important how it all works. What's interesting is what properties it gives to us. For instance, censorship resistance, meaning everyone has equal access to all information written on the blockchain. Because that network of validators can't just simply be shut down. It's a decentralized system. And even if one of those validators behaves in a way that we don't like, there are still others that behave well and that let us still work with the chain. Now, so far we've just been talking about Sol, which you might be thinking, yeah, okay, programmable money, fine, whatever. But it can be more than that. In our ledger, we will not only have the Sol balance, but we can put arbitrary data. And that allows us to build any kind of application on Solana. Of course, not all applications make sense to be on the blockchain. For others, you might prefer to have your own server, your own backend, or a private blockchain. But if you do want to have access to this one big fast state machine, then you can utilize it and develop on Solana. And that's what we want to do. So, how do we get started with Solana development? Well, solana.com/developers has some nice resources. And there's also the installation guide here. And a lot of the stuff for Solana is written in Rust. And if you want to build programs yourself, I also recommend that you work in Rust. I do have some Rust tutorials as well, in case you're new to that. So yeah, we'll need to install Rust, and then we'll get the Solana CLI, so the command line interface. We'll also install Anchor. That's a framework for developing Solana programs. Not the only one, but the most popular one. So that's what we're getting started with on day 3. And then we'll also get Surfpool CLI, since that's just the best tool for local testing in 2026. And to install all of that, there's this neat little script here that we can totally trust, right? That will install all of this for us. So we'll just paste that in our terminal and then we let it install. I do recommend working on some Linux or Mac. Windows doesn't really like Rust. If you're on Windows, I use WSL, and I have worked with Rust before, that's why it's updating mine. And just like that, all of my Rust is now updated. Now it's downloading the Solana CLI, and then it's installing that. Then it's installing Anchor. Voila! We're on the newest versions with Rust 1.93, Solana CLI 3.015, Anchor CLI 0.32. Anchor will soon be in version 1, and Surfpool CLI just came to version 1. Cool! Installation complete. We can restart our terminal or start a new one, and then we should be able to say Solana, and it should give us the version we just installed. Cool! That's the Solana CLI. If you just type Solana, you'll get all the commands that you can do with this command line interface. It also comes with the Solana keygen. That's a tool that lets you create a key pair. But Andy, you haven't told us yet what a key pair even is. That's true. Thanks for pointing that out. So, we have been saying that anybody can read what's on the chain, right? You can see how much balance I have, but you cannot spend my balance because you would need to convince the validators that you own this balance. And you would prove that by providing a digital signature for this address. So Solana uses cryptography, specifically elliptic curve cryptography, to enable that. And how does that work? We're using public and private keys. You might be familiar with that concept. Just in case you're not, let me give you a real quick introduction. When I create a new wallet, like the one for Andy, I basically get two keys. One private key and one public key. The public key I can show to others. That's what they need to be able to send me something. Maybe you know that from PGP emails. Or maybe you know that from SSH keys. Same idea. You have the public key and then my private key. That's what I hold on to and I don't show anybody, because that's what will then allow me to read those emails or spend that money that I received. And those public-private keys can come in different forms. You might have them exist on hardware wallets like these, or for development purposes, we often have them as software wallets directly on our computer, like the one we would create with the Solana keygen. So let's do that. Basically, when I'm doing this, using the Solana keygen to create myself a new key pair, I can add a passphrase for security, but let's ignore that. Then it generates for me a key pair file, and that contains my public and private keys. The public key, it also prints here, that will then correspond to the Solana address, like here. But then it also has the private key, which only I should have, that I need to keep secret, because that's what I need to then produce the signature for this address to convince the validators that it's actually my address and that I'm allowed to do that. And what it's printing here is a so-called seed phrase that will let me recover my private key that's stored in there, so that I must also not share. And since I just did that on YouTube, I will obviously not use that address for anything productive, because everybody has access to it because they saw this seed phrase. But I think you get that part. That's blockchain basics that is better to repeat, even though you're probably aware of that. But in case you're not, maybe a general side note, the space of crypto is very, how would I say, mean? Dangerous? I don't know. We are kicking out the central authorities here. We're not doing cloud computing where there's a central authority that we pay to do the compute for us. No, we're getting rid of those intermediaries. Therefore, there's more responsibility on us as developers and also as users. But that also makes us easier targets, and therefore there's more scams in that space. So just be aware of that as well. Okay, so now that we have our key pair stored here, we can use that. Actually, no, before, I want to show you something else while we're creating key pairs, because that's just something that I like to do so much. I gotta show you the grind of the Solana keygen, because that allows you to create a key pair where the public key starts with or ends with a certain letter combination. So for instance, I wanted to start with Andy and I tell it to search for 1, that's enough. 4 letters is still something that it should manage. Obviously, you can't grind a public key with 30 matching letters. That would be a security concern. Because essentially what it's doing here, it's creating a lot of keys, and then when the public key actually matches what I'm searching for, then it returns that. So now it wrote that to this file. This is now also a key pair file, same as the one we had in our key pair path here. That's the default key pair path. If I want my Solana CLI to take this key pair now, I can just tell it to Solana config, take that key, so -k, and then I say take this, and then it will use that as my key pair path. I do that a lot in my videos as well. And to make sure that that worked, I can say Solana address, and then it will tell me my public key of my key pair. Okay, so far so good. We have created a key pair. That's what we need to interact with the chain. However, you might not want to do everything on the actual Solana blockchain. Why not? Well, because that's expensive. Because we will need actual Sol. And it's not necessary that we do everything on the mainnet, because at first we want to just develop stuff and then test it. We don't need to have it in production for other people yet. So, there are different clusters. Mainnet, that's the real thing where the actual Sol lives that you pay good money for. Testnet, this one is for testing the network, not the programs. This is for the validators to try out some stuff, test new Solana features or do stress tests, that kind of stuff. That's the testnet. And we as developers, we want to use the devnet, because the devnet is basically a copy of the mainnet, just that it's not so serious, and we can basically get some Sol for free. We can also do local testing, run our own validator and create our own little network, and we will do that with Surfpool. But for now, let's stay with devnet, because there you don't need to do anything. And we already see if we change to devnet, then there's no balance on this account because that just exists on the mainnet. So it's basically a different instance of Solana. It's not really Solana, it's the Solana devnet. So if we want to operate on the Solana devnet, we can say Solana config -ud, so change cluster to devnet. That's the short way of writing it. The long way of writing it I already forgot, but you can see in the help. Oh, URL or the moniker. That's what we want to set. So devnet. So we could set URL to devnet, and the short way of doing this is just -ud. There we go. Then we are on the Solana devnet. And here I can say Solana balance, and it will tell me, well, I don't have any Sol. That's fine, because on the Solana devnet, I can say Solana airdrop, please give me 1 Sol. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. But that's good that it doesn't work, because I wanted to show you the alternative anyway. The alternative to this is to go to faucet.solana.com. Here we gotta connect our GitHub and then paste the wallet address. So just Solana address, this thing we paste in here, tell it how much we want. I'm okay with just 1 Sol for now. I airdrop this, and then just like that, hopefully, there we go. It tells me it was successful, and then I can check balance again, and all of a sudden I have 1 Sol. Amazing. And that, by the way, is again public information. If I go to that address in the Explorer, oh, by the way, I didn't explain what this is. The Solana Explorer at explorer.solana.com lets me explore the state of the blockchain, in this case of the devnet cluster. Here I can see this address, compare wallet account, has this much Sol. This is my money now. Because I have the private key for this public key, I can now say, hey, I want to change this. I want to send, so I do Solana transfer, and then I need to say where I send to. I'm just going to send to this address here, and then I need to say how much, maybe half a Sol. I'll send half a Sol to this address, and because that address doesn't exist, I also need to tell it, hey, allow unfunded recipient. And then if I do that, I use my private key to sign a message that says that I allow this transfer, which I will send to an RPC, which will forward it to a validator, which will put it in a block, which will then actually change the state. So let's do this. I'm sending this transaction, it comes back with a signature. So this is me proving that I actually allow this, and I can do that because the Solana CLI has access to this file, because that's where my private key lives. And then if I come here and I refresh that, then we see now this address has 0.5 Sol because I sent it there. And we can see the details of this transfer in the transaction history here, where we see this is the same signature that we had here. So that's the transaction signature. We were transacting on the blockchain. We did a transfer, which is a transaction from one to the other. It transacts. Hey, I give you this and you give me nothing. That's the transaction that I did with that other account. Yeah, we see the timestamp. We see a bunch of technical stuff. We see basically the block. We see recent block hash. And here we also see the fee, how much we had to pay in Sol for this transaction to actually happen. A bunch more technical stuff that I don't want to go into. And here we see the overview, this account. So from this wallet address, from Andy, he sent it to this wallet address. So this guy is paying, this guy is receiving. And the details, what the system program is, what instructions are, what an account really is, that is the topic for tomorrow's video. Because tomorrow I really want to have a look at the fundamentals, the fundamental concepts that you really need to understand in order to do Solana development, accounts, instructions, and transactions. So join me tomorrow. Until then, here's a little challenge for you. What I want you to do until tomorrow is go through the installation process. Make sure that you have the Solana CLI and Anchor CLI installed. And then I want you to create yourself a file system wallet like this one. You don't need to grind it. It's fine if it's a random address, but make sure that you have a key pair file and make sure that you have some balance on that account. Shouldn't be too difficult, but that's the minimum we'll need. Oh, and also if you want to follow along tomorrow, make sure that you have npm or pnpm installed, because we will be working with Node tomorrow, doing a little bit of TypeScript. All right, and that's day one done. Don't forget the homework. Today was just a bit of an introduction, not so technical yet, but we will get increasingly more technical with every video. So I'll see you back here tomorrow for day 2 of the How to Become a Solana Dev in 2026 series. Don't forget your homework, and I'm looking forward to having you back for day 2.